Hey, everybody. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, a conversation series where I get to sit down and talk to other writers. And before we get started, just a reminder that my company, Unbound Writer, is open and operational and ready for business. You can go to unboundwriter.com. We're offering in-person retreats in Boulder, Colorado, really immersive 2.5-day instruction and writing retreats. I'm offering one-on-one coaching and mentoring with me. And we'll also soon be launching our online classes. We're going to be launching with a series of 3 classes. They're all a la carte, and you can pick and choose whichever ones you want to take. And we're also going to be reaching out to other writers to help record classes as well. So I think the first 3 classes are going to be the ones that I've recorded, and one's going to be on the writer's psychology, one's going to be on creating effective newsletters, and then we're going to have one on basically how I write thrillers, like writing the first person thriller. So I'm excited to be recording those and doing all the homework sheets for them. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you will find them interesting as well. On with the show. So today, I don't do a lot of repeats on this show because a lot of what I talk about is the author's journey. And so once because I'm curious about how they decided to become a writer, what their origin story was, what, publishing highs and lows they've gone through, that kind of a thing. But once in a while, I'll do a repeat guest, and I had the pleasure of talking again today to Kim Giarratano. So Kim was on the show, I think, about a year and a half or so ago, and she had just come out with she's an award-winning mystery writer for teens and adults, and she had just come out with Death of a Dancing Queen, and now she is just about to launch on May 15th of this year, Devil in Profile, which is part of the same series. It's going to be a total of a 3-book series. Her third book is due to her publisher very soon, as we discussed in the interview. But what's nice about when I have repeat guests is rather than talk about the journey, we just get to talk shop. So my conversation with Kim today was a lot about the other things you have to be doing as a writer, things that we love doing, things that we're not so good at or that we don't enjoy as much, establishing your writing community and editorial letters and all that fun stuff. So we didn't really talk about her journey anymore. You can watch that episode on my website or on YouTube or on podcasts. But this is much more kind of inside baseball for writers. So, and we had a lot of fun. She's got a great sense of humor. And it was interesting. And we did talk a little bit about Devil in Profile and where she got the inspiration from, and just about the fact that, kind of like me, she just writes stories that are pretty wild. And we talked a lot about how do you figure out how to rein something in? How do you make the suspension of disbelief less of an onerous thing for the reader? Because you want the reader to feel like, oh, if this were me, what would I do? But if it's too bonkers, it's hard to make it feel like it's something that could happen to you. So it's that mix of being wildly entertaining and creative and original with being grounded in a way that readers will still have empathy for your character. So we dissected that a bit in this episode as well. And we made up another story. So we got to make up 2 stories together. So, and she's great at it. So we had a good time. I think you're going to like this one. This is my conversation with Kim Giarratano. How you been?
I've been good. How are you? You can hear me okay, right? Because I don't have like a mic anymore. My broke. So
Oh, they're not that expensive.
I'll add it to the list. I know.
These authors have to do with their everyone. I always think about that a lot, about the conception, the perception that authors just write and that's all they do. And the reality of it is that's probably 20% of my writing job is the actual writing, and learning how to, investing in equipment and all, because you're doing stuff, and it's amazing, and it makes a difference, doesn't it? Like part of my coaching is teaching people how to present yourself, how to enunciate, how to do a reading. And a lot of authors, I think, this is totally my opinion, just do it because they have to, but they don't embrace it. And I think it detracts from your image as an author a little bit, as much as we don't want to have to do all that other shit. Do you find that to be true in your case?
So I'm an outgoing person, like I'm an extrovert. So I never
Mhm.
think,
Which is also rare for an author.
yeah, I hear that a lot. People are like, oh,
Mhm.
you're an extrovert. I was like, yeah, which why is writing for me can be so lonely. I'm like if I'm home all day working, I go stir crazy. Like I need other
Yeah,
people. And then I'm like,
I'm the
what's going on?
exact same way.
Yeah. So what I have been doing though is trying to practice speaking. Uh,
Mhm.
I find I a lot. I'm like,
Mhm.
it's terrible. So I'm in the car when I'm driving around by myself. I will actually practice talking out loud and making sure that I am not peppering the silences with my umming. So that's another thing that I've been doing.
Yeah, no, that's great. My other business, we teach communication coaching, so we do a lot of talking about public speaking. And I think and that's great because you listen to yourself and you do pick up, and it's never what you think it is. You think, oh,
Mhm.
I speak too quickly, and you realize, oh no, I just say a lot, or I use my hands all the time. And all of those things are fine if you make them natural and you make them adhere to your personality. I think sometimes if you over practice not doing something like a little tick that you have, sometimes it comes across as a little bit robotic. So the most important thing I think is just to be yourself, but you got to make sure that version of yourself is interesting to listen to.
Yeah, yeah. I hope people are like, oh, she's so boring. Like that would be the worst.
And it's funny, that's how I feel about readings, because if I go to an author's event, or maybe it's an anthology where they have multiple authors reading, I kind of go crazy because most of the time I'm bored, which is a terrible thing to say, but it's the truth. And a lot of it is due to the author's inability to read well or to read succinctly, because I think a lot of authors hide behind the fact that they're doing a reading. Like, thank God I don't have to speak extemporaneously. I can just read the words on the page. So they'll go 10 minutes and you're like, oh, Jesus, this is too much. It takes a really strong, great personality to do a 10-minute reading and keep readers engaged. So if I do readings at all, I do 2 to 3 minutes at most. And I think I do it well, but I just assume everyone's bored.
You know, Riley Sager, I think it's Sager or Sager. I don't know if I'm
Sager,
saying
I think. Yeah.
no, was it him? It wasn't him. There's an author, now I feel stupid, who does not do readings for his author visits. He does a
Hmm.
slideshow. Who wrote the Haunted House book?
I don't
Anyway,
know.
he does a slideshow. So he wrote this book about a haunted house and people
Mhm.
trying to sell it. So he did like a whole presentation on houses that are supposedly haunted that
Mhm.
are real estate agents have to sell. I thought that is a genius way to fix that. Like if somebody
Totally.
invited me for a reading, I don't think that I would read. I don't know. I mean, I probably read like a smidge, like you said, 2 to 3 minutes, but I think like a PowerPoint presentation of something bonkers would be so much more fun. Like
100%. Yeah.
you could, I
And I
mean,
think
like
that, go
a
ahead.
crime that inspired your book.
Right.
You could have a
Right.
ball with it. I mean, it's work, but it's way more fun to listen
But
to.
you can do that. That could be your presentation every time you talk about that book. So it's
Yeah.
it's worth the investment. And I think a lot of writers, especially if they're debut authors, they don't realize they have the power to be like, no, I'm not doing that, or I'm going to do this instead. When people say, we want you to come in to do a reading, I think that's just because they don't know. They like, what do authors do? They do readings. But I think at the Colorado Book Award, for example, everyone gets up who wins and does the reading. I never read. I just talk about my book because I'm like, everyone's so bored by this point.
I think somebody should go up and do stand up. Like,
Yeah,
would it be funny
like
if you're like,
terrible stand up.
Carter's going to read from his book, and all of a sudden you're like, it's great to
two,
be here.
two Jews walk into a bar. Like, what?
Um, I actually pitched a panel idea to the Barnes and Noble in Jersey because I figured like me and there's like a bunch of Jersey authors like Kelly Garrett, like Robin Geigel, like Delia Pitts. I was like, we could all do a panel together. It'd be so fun. We could moderate it. And they never wrote me back.
Oh.
Barnes and Noble and Freehold is listening to this, I want an email saying, yes, Kim, we're on board for this. I was
So,
like,
I mean, totally. And I think it's interesting to talk about this stuff because I'm going through it right now because I just had a book come out a few weeks ago. So it's
I
that
know, congrats.
cycle. Oh, thank you. It's that cycle of like, okay, you're going to do some events. You got to chase down people to go, which is always a painful thing to do. You have to make sure you not only are you promoting on social media, but you're actually putting out nice imagery, like you're working in Canva and
Yes.
doing some things that are eye-catching. And why should I go to these events? You got to really make it and it's a lot of work. And sometimes or a lot of times it's not a very big crowd and it's frustrating, but it's all part of it and you have to embrace it because it all is additive, right? Over time, you're going to get experience doing that stuff and people are going to become more and more aware of you. But if you go in with the attitude of like, oh, I hate this kind of a thing, you're just kind of manifesting that for the rest of your career, I think, because you're never going to want to do stuff. Then people are going to want to invite you. So it's a whole, are you doing a lot for your upcoming book?
No, I mean, I shouldn't do it like that, but so I live in a rural area. So the nearest bookstore is 45
You're
minutes.
Pennsylvania, if I recall.
Yeah, I'm in the Poconos, so it's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
rural.
right.
So for me to kind of do some things, I did a book signing at a new Barnes and Noble in February, I think early February, they opened it up and they actually contacted me, which was a delight to my ego. They're like, oh,
Hmm.
I'd love to have you. And then I'm like, can I bring friends? Like I brought Kelly Garrett and Robin Geigel because I don't want to hang out there by myself. But even my local library was like, our author events don't do too well because we don't get a lot of people to come. And I'm like, but we're all local. Like this is as local as we can get. So
Right.
I should.
And why is that? They also have to really promote it. They have to be creative about it. They have to make it engaging. Why should I come? And a lot of times, and I love libraries and I will always do library events, but sometimes it's just like, yeah, we put it on our Facebook page. And like, well, sometimes it needs a little bit more traction than that. Cause a lot of people get the newsletter or whatever, they could advertise it more, but and
Yeah.
it's frustrating, right? When you show up and you're like, oh, I will talk to the three of you for the next
It would
hour.
make me, yeah. And I like we're extroverts, we can talk, but even then
Right.
I'm like, this is awkward. So I was a librarian and I ran a ton of programs and you have to write press releases. Like libraries really do promote, I would argue they probably promote a lot more than certain large book chains
Hmm.
because they have to overcome the hurdle of getting out their information. So
Hmm.
they'll put things in the local paper, they'll advertise it internally to all of their patrons and things like that. I think where I live, a lot of people just don't want to leave the house still, you
Hmm.
know, people, the kids, they just don't want to schlep anywhere anymore. But
Yeah. And it just, but the online stuff is taking off. Like I'll do online panels and be like,
yeah,
oh, wow, 100 people showed up. That's and they're not just there to see me because it's a panel, but it's still your name is part of that. So that's always kind of cool. But that's a lot of work too. And then doing podcasts and all those different things. It's a struggle.
I
And
like
but
the
it's
podcast.
not
I'm not gonna lie. Those are fun for me. I'm like, oh, I get to chat with somebody new for an hour.
but it depends, right? Because have you and I won't even remember names, so I'm not going to name names. But one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I was doing podcasts that I hated. There's just like it was first of all, it's usually about the book, which I know we're going to talk about your book a little bit. Normally I don't talk about books because I'm like, I don't have time to
Yep.
read everyone's book. I'm much more interested in the person. And I think the readers are probably interested in the person rather than talking about a book they haven't read for an hour. But when it's the static questions every time and there's no reaction to your answer, it's just go to the next question. And then it's which five writers, living or dead, do you want to have dinner with? It's like, oh my fucking God. Like
I
it's
wouldn't even
it's
know. I'd be like,
it's so lazy to me. Like, so I really am like, let's have a real conversation. Let's talk about the good and bad things and what's going on in your life. And whether people are interested or not, I don't know. It's interesting to me.
So I just got back from Left Coast Crime,
Oh,
and
how
some
was
of the
that?
best parts of the conference are just talking to other authors and being like, "So how's it going for you?" And you're like, "Okay, how's it
Totally.
going for you?" And you leave like with a relief. You're like,
Right.
because
Right.
we don't have a
Because
water cooler.
Right.
Like that's the water
What
cooler.
what the water cooler is social media. And there you log on to Instagram and you just see this like all this success or all this perceived success. And it beats you down a little bit. You're like, really? Like they seem to be
Yeah,
really taking off, and
100%.
I'm happy for them, but that's not my experience. And then you talk to them in person, you realize like, yeah, it's a struggle for everybody with, a few exceptions, obviously, but I do like having those doses of reality where like, let's just talk about like, I'm really disappointed that my PR team didn't do more or whatever it is. It's nice to have that shared experience. I don't know if you ran into that in Left Coast.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of commiserating. There's and like I just don't hear it too, right? Because social media, we're not exactly amplifying our downer moments.
No,
So it's usually like,
nobody does.
private messages. And sometimes like you don't know people well enough to be like, so how's that going, that thing? But in person, you can be like, how's it going?
Right. Cause you're drinking, you're like,
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
exactly.
Thank God for
I,
booze.
although I will say I did that once, and it was just, and kind of writer friends of mine, and then people I met on the podcast. I remember I was having more of an internal moment rather than an existential crisis, but just, I don't talk a whole lot with my publishing team. It's very much when we need to talk, we talk, but I'm just like, I don't have any context for, is this how everyone interacts? So I would make appointments with like 5 or 6 other writers. I'm like, hey, can we just talk for like half an hour so I can pick your brain? And I found that really cathartic just to have a one-on-one, Zoom call and just be like, what does your publisher say when this happens? Or whether it's a good or a bad thing. That was really helpful for me. And I don't know if a lot of authors do that, but I find that very helpful.
Yeah, I do. Well, yeah, because we'll ask questions like, "Oh, what's your publisher doing? What are they not doing? What do you wish they were doing?" Like there'll be some honest conversations with that. Obviously, knowing that it doesn't go past, you know, the wall of bodies that are standing around, outside a conference room. But
Right. Right.
yeah, I wish I was on like, there's a lot of authors like, oh, my WhatsApp group, my author WhatsApp group. And I'm like, I need to be on a WhatsApp group with some other author. Because I have a dear friend that I message a lot who's always talking me off cliffs. But I need a larger group so that I'm not constantly bombarding her with my like neuroses and insecurity.
Right. Well, I think one of the hardest things to do as an author, and probably as a human trying to manage your way through life, is to identify the things that you can't control. And in the publishing industry, for an author, most of it is out of your control. And so that's what gets to be a little bit of a struggle sometimes, is when people are posting about things, you start second guessing yourself, and you're not realizing it's out of your control. Like
Mhm.
sales in a way. All right, now my cat's going crazy, so I'm going to shut my door here real quick. Never a dull moment here with the
Animal.
menagerie. But so if I were on a WhatsApp group and people are posting things that made me feel worse, I think that would not be great. If it's something that, so and so, oh, I just got this massive advance. Like, oh, does that do me any good?
I know, but I need some work besties. I don't have enough work besties, because I'm like, alone in my dining room.
Yeah, and that is true. And it's funny coming from a real job where you have, an organizational structure, to being in your living room all day, you lose all context. And that's another thing I did one year, is like talking about my editor. I was just thinking like, I've been with her for 5 or 6 books and she's great and I love her, but we don't have, we don't talk all the time. We have, like I said, we talk when we need to. And I'm like, if I were in a corporate job, I would have had an employee review at some point. So I emailed her. I'm like, can you give me an employee review? And we really just had an hour-long conversation. And I'm just like, what do you guys think of me? Because I had no idea. I'm like, what do you picture for my career? Like, do you even talk about that? Like, I just have no idea. And they've always treated me great, but you don't get any feedback really. Your feedback is whether or not your book gets sold and then how it's reviewed. That's basically it. And that's sometimes not enough, I think, to really, and that doesn't mean you're going to change how you write, but I think information is good. The data points are solid to at least have that, like bad reviews. I'm not going to change my book because of bad reviews, but it is information to keep in mind.
I am a big fan of tell me how the sausage is made.
Mhm.
I constantly say that to my editor. So I ask a lot of questions and she gives me like nice emails with long explanations about things. And I am grateful for it because having that information to me is so much more reassuring than just not knowing. So
Yeah.
I'll often be like, explain how this works. And she does.
Yeah.
To her credit, she really does. Because it's funny though, you should mention like the feedback though. Like, sometimes when I go through my edits, most of the edits are on stuff that needs to be fixed. And sometimes I'm like, they didn't comment about this joke I wrote. Like, this is a great one-liner, and there's nothing,
Right.
and then, like, and you're like, did it not land? And then like there's feedback on like, a throwaway line. And I was like, that was funny. So sometimes I
Right.
just want more feedback on my jokes because it's very
Yeah. My
important.
editorial letter, at least with source books, always starts with, here's what we really loved about this. And of course, it's a tenth of the size of here's what we
Yeah,
suggest you
here's
go look
what
at.
needs to be fixed.
But I do love that. I love, like, because they know it's so psychological, and I think it's true. I don't think they're lying, but I think it's like they know it softens the blow of, like, we love the fact that you named this guy Randy, and we also want a subplot.
We love the color of the dress. Now
Right,
change
right.
the entire setting.
But it is a very obtuse industry, and my experience has been that a lot of publishers, they work well with you, but they are a little bit guarded, and not maybe as willing to let you know how the sausage is made. So I think to your editor's benefit, that's fantastic that they're doing that. I will always get a straight answer if I ask a question. It just might not be heavily detailed, and that's fine, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't know either. I'm not asking, like, what do I need to do to write a New York Times bestseller, because nobody knows the answer to that question. Um but but sometimes you have questions about print runs
Mhm.
or cover design or whatever it is, and and you just have to kind of at one point step back and say, all right, I'm just one part of this big team. I write the book, eh, but they know what they're doing in terms of, if they like this title better, um, this is what they do. They have a whole
Yeah.
team that does this. So who am I to say that's not the right title for it? But at the end of the day, everyone's, I think, still kind of guessing, and they're trying to make it as scientific as possible. But it's an industry based on hunches.
It's a good point. I mean, my publisher's small, so I think they're a little more nimble and they're able to tell me things that maybe if I was at a much larger place, they'd be like, ask your agent or, leave it, I don't know, go away.
Right.
But my publisher is smaller and it's much more intimate, I feel like. Like there's a lot of good communication between me and the editor and the publishing assistant and things like that. So
Right.
like when I have a question, they answer it really as fully as they can. Like just even putting foil on a book cover. I'm gonna show you
Right.
it. Like, because the first book has foil. So I wanted the second book
Hmm.
to have foil. Like
Hmm.
even just getting that done, there's a process. There is profit and losses and how much money does this cost? And like just
Sure.
stuff that probably I have no business knowing because I am, it's my job to write what's inside, not
Right.
actual figure out printing stuff. But I had questions and I was curious and I got a really good explanation and I appreciated that a lot because I don't know, it's probably a character flaw to constantly want to know everything,
No,
like
I mean, it's good to be curious. Um,
I want to know stuff. It makes me feel better if I know stuff, I find.
right. And the landscape is constantly in flux. So those answers change all the time. So a great question is always like, well, you have me in trade paperback. I want to be in hardcover. Why can't I? And that's when and you start to realize, like, well, the last 3 years, people have really shifted from wanting to pay $29 for an author who's not, New York Times bestseller. So we find that the sales overall, the revenue is greater if you go with the cheaper volume, because it's just going to sell more and it pushes people to ebooks more. Um, and that might change 3 years, who knows? So
Mhm.
it's patterns are constantly changing, and publishers are constantly emerging and closing, and
Yes.
Amazon is a constant powerhouse and doing things differently. And so you just have to kind of keep your head down a little bit. But I think it is good to be curious, because you don't want to be just in a complete vacuum all the time.
Right.
You have
I
to be
mean,
prepared for some of the answers to be not ones that you want to hear.
yeah, that's a good point as well. But I'm just like, I need to know. Tell me
Right.
everything.
So your second book in the series is coming out. When you Devil in Profile, it's beautiful. It comes out
Yeah,
May, right?
14th.
May
Yeah.
14th. That's awesome. Um, when you wrote the first one, was the vision always this is a series? And had you
Yeah.
written series before? I forget.
I had started a YA series. So I have
Mhm.
like 2 books in a YA series, and then I sort of I indie published them, and I sort of stopped after the second book. So when I started writing Death of a Dancing Queen, yeah, it did have a series vibe, because I just had a lot of ideas, and I knew where it would take her, and I knew like a character arc over the long haul. Like and I pitched it kind of as a series. I figured whoever picked it up would want it as a series because it had that potential. But when it was picked up, it was only picked up as a single title. They wanted to see kind of how it did. It was sorry, that's UPS. If you can hear my dog barking,
Yep.
he drove past. Trevor, he drove past. Trevor, come here.
My dog
So
does the same thing.
so where was I going with that? Yeah, so they only bought the first book, and they're like, we'll just see how it goes. It was the first book for the imprint, with the idea though that they would extend it for the series. And then they bought books 2 and 3. So three is due May 1st.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
I'm writing to deadline, which is unusual for me. I usually can get in before a deadline, but not this time. So and that is a trip, writing this third book, because I like to think I am known for bonkers plots. Like, I
Mhm.
do not want anybody picking up my book going, oh, I know why they did it. I know who the villain is and why. Like, in a
Mhm.
chapter in. Like, I don't want that to be what happens. So I have a tendency on taking my readers like through a maze. But yeah, so I knew it would be a series. So but Devil in Profile, the second book, so much fun. I had like a joy writing this. There's a lot
Mhm.
of funny moments. There's like a funny Hanukkah scene. So I know you're gonna be reading it in May going, Hanukkah, but that's when I
Yeah.
wrote it. I must have written that scene in December, but I had so much fun, and just taking her in a different direction, and introducing new characters and
Mhm.
resolving some things. It was just a joy. The
Well,
third book was
I
tough.
was just going to say it's interesting writing a series, because I've never written a series, and I think what a lot of readers don't realize, because how often do you get that question? It's like, well, would you ever consider writing a series? And at this point, it's not doesn't weigh heavy in my heart to want to do that, because I've found that I just love to world build, and I think writing bonkers plots is easier when you're writing standalones, in my opinion. But
Hmm.
the thing with series is exactly what you just said, is if you're pitching it and you're not, again, a top 1% name, they're going to say, well, why would we commit to two if we don't even know how one is going to do? And so my experience has been, you either have the series actually written and you sell the series, or you write standalone. Your case is a little bit different, where you kind of envisioned a series and they envisioned a series, but they were a little bit cagey, but it worked out great. What would you have done, given how much you've ended up loving writing the second book, if they had said, no, we don't want a second book in that series? Would you have still written that one because you kind of had your mind set on it?
I don't know. It's a good question. I probably would have. I could have indie published it. I have experience publishing, self-publishing, and things like that later down the line if I wanted to. I have another book that I'm also working on, a side series. I would have pivot. I can pivot. There's a lot of pivoting that I can do.
Pivoting is important.
I could pivot to something else. I'm not low on ideas.
Yeah.
I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks full of ideas. So I probably just would have pivoted. But also, I think I waited until they said we're going to go ahead with books 2 and 3 before I really started
Right.
writing. Like
Right.
I have
Right.
sometimes I'll just have a glimmer of an idea and then I'll just do some research. Like Devlin Profile came out because I was reading an article and I actually put it in the author's note in the book, which I'm going to refer to because my memory is really awful. But I was reading an Atlantic article from 2018 about Nazi looted art, but particularly how the Swiss train police arrested a very elderly man because they were suspicious of for tax reasons. He had like deposited a bunch of money into his account and declare it something weird, but he was traveling with a lot of cash on him on a Swiss train, and that was very weird. Turns out he was the son of Hitler's art collector. And a lot of the art that the Nazis had taken from museums in Europe were in this man's possession. And when he died, it went to his son, like works that nobody had seen for decades. And what he would do is he would sell off the art when he needed some cash. He would just sell off a piece. So just reading this article, which was fascinating, like really started off Devlin Profile. I was like, I know what my crime is. I know what I'm doing.
So interesting. Yeah, it's funny. My first book, which never sold, was about stolen Nazi art. Because similar to you, if you read one article on it, it's fascinating. And to see those pictures of all the art that was whisked away and put into tunnels. And was it Goering who was like the big art guy? The Nazi who really was the big corpulent Nazi. I think it was Goering who was really into like steal whatever you can. I mean, it wasn't obviously just museums. It was a lot of Jewish homes that they just raided. So, I mean, just it's unbelievable the amount that was pilfered. But then when the Allies kind of came upon some of these tunnels and you just see these rooms just full of just priceless masterpiece. It's just hard to like comprehend when you see a photo like that, and it immediately makes you want to write about it. And I loved researching all that stuff.
Yeah, so I poked around a bit. Like I started researching which artists were targeted in particular, and it was really Hitler's idea was he also stole a lot of Jewish art because they were eventually wanted to open, if they succeeded, like a museum to Jewish culture that they had pretty much destroyed. So dark and morbid and gross.
Wow.
But I was fascinated. Oh yeah. But I was fascinated, what fascinated me most was that there was an elderly man with this connection who had hoarded all of this art in an apartment. And he wanted to pass it down, but his kids didn't want anything to do with it. And so like, it was just so inspiring for the plot of Devlin Profile. I was like,
right. So this is modern day because he's an elderly man and he was the son of Hitler's art collector. So, and you think about even just the logistics of like, how do you keep that hidden? How do you sell something that has been obviously missing from the public eye for decades upon decades and not draw massive suspicion? So I think that's fascinating as well.
Yeah, wow. Hence a plot is born.
Right. And then you kind of like, it's funny when you get inspired by a news story, like I've done that once or twice where I'll start reading and I'll stop reading. I'm like, I don't want to know anymore. I don't want to copy what actually happened. I want to just take this and make it my own because it's so fascinating to me. And I did that with the Slenderman stabbings. There was like, it ended up being a mini series about it. So I'm like, I'm not watching any of that because I don't want to know. Because I wanted this to be totally my own plot, which is, because you always get worried about saying, no, you stole this or you plagiarized from that.
Well, there's no way. I mean, the plot that I write is so nuts that I don't think anybody would be like, that seems dangerously close to the truth. It's inspired by true events. Definitely not.
It's funny. I was talking to somebody the other day who's not a writer, but he knows that I am. And he was asking me about the books. How are they going? I'm like, great. My ninth just came out. He's like, wow, that's a lot. He's like, are you really using a lot of AI now to help? And it was so funny. And I don't blame him. Like, it's like, I would ask stupid questions of another industry, but to me, it was like him saying, hey, so you'd have to plagiarize in order to write that fast? And it was like, so like, it was so such a, innocent question,
Like,
but such a shocking
no.
thing to me. I'm like, are you kidding? Use AI to write my books? That would be like the last thing in the world I would ever do except for plagiarizing. But it's funny because I think a lot of people assume in order to get these crazy or wild plots, your imagination is limited. So therefore you rely on something else like AI. And I'm like, no,
I'm
that's
inside
not.
my head and tell me how limiting it is. To the point where I'm writing this, and I'm like, I think I'm confusing myself. I don't remember what I did. How did I get this point? Like, but I don't
Totally.
know.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
it's
that's me
what I
too.
worry about.
I'm constantly, because I don't outline. So I don't have a structure. So like the first 100 pages, I'm just throwing stuff because it entertains me. I'm like, this is weird and wild and fun. And, and then I'm like, now what explains all of it? There's this,
Yep.
how do I explain this without being such a suspension of disbelief? And so, but that's also kind of the joy of it as well, is the puzzle solving all of it. You've written yourself into a corner, and you not only do you have to find a way out, you have to find a way out that's believable and interesting and exciting,
Mhm.
and different. And as hard as that is, that's, I think, where kind of the joy of writing comes from, is like, because that's really making your brain work, and you get to know yourself pretty well in that process, I think.
Yeah, whenever I can climb out of a plot hole, I'm like, go me. I'm like, I did it. Yes.
Right.
And I'm like
Do you ever
jotting,
like, do
forget
you
it.
ever start something and worry that like, I wonder if someone's done something, and because I don't read a lot of what I write.
Not me.
And yeah, well, because it sounds like your stuff is so different.
I don't know if
Um,
it's different. I just think the way I meander to get to somewhere, I'm like, who's doing this? Nobody with sense, anyway.
and what kind of edit notes do you get then?
Um, my edit notes are usually not, I'll find the plot holes. I'll be like, nobody found this plot hole. Like, I'll find it later. I forget. Usually they have to do with just rounding out some characterization. And sometimes I'll get edit notes from like friends, like a friend who's an older woman. When I first did Death of a Dancing Queen and I sent it to her, she did not like how I characterized the grandpa a little bit in my early
Mm-hmm.
draft. She felt like I was too harsh on him
Mm-hmm.
because she was roughly the same age as the character. And she's like, you're being too hard on him. And so stuff, sometimes it's characterization. I got to dig a little deeper. Sometimes, I mean, that's usually what it comes down to.
But that's
Sometimes,
her opinion too. Everyone's going to have
I mean, but it was
thing
fair
that's
because
sensitive. Yeah.
yeah. But this book that I'm writing, my third book, I do expect my edit letter to be, how did we get here? You need
Robust.
to increase steps.
Right. Yeah. I've had notes have said things like, can we tie this back into reality a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm expecting those.
Yeah.
I
And
like to think
you try to, but
the family dynamics are very real and true and feel very honest. And then my crimes just feel ridiculous. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with, the heart of the book is Billie and her relationship with her brother, her grandfather, her mother, her, like her love interests. Those are very much grounded in reality.
yeah.
But the nutty crimes that she has to solve are where you're on a ride and you're just happy to go along with it, I'd like to think.
Right, right. But it has to be believable. And I know last time when we spoke a lot about being inspired by TV, which is where, as from a thriller perspective, I definitely get a lot more motivation and inspiration from than because I mostly read nonfiction. But even the nonfiction, there's stuff. So, for example, I think of like two documentaries or two shows in particular: Lover, Stalker, Killer, which was a documentary, and the Baby Reindeer, which is out right now,
Mhm. My
which is
husband's
based on a
documentary.
true story. And you think like, if I wrote this as fiction, it it wouldn't be believable. It wouldn't be even interesting because it feels so contrived. But the fact that it's a real story is fascinating. And so that's hard as a fiction writer to be like, I want to write that fascinating stuff, but they know it's fiction. So yeah, so you have to kind of pull it back sometimes a little bit, and it gets difficult to do, I think.
I feel like, so for me, as long as like the writing feels real, the voice feels authentic, the setting feels authentic, it's set in a modern world, like, that even if I go on these, twists and turns, people will just, they buy into it because I'll watch Veronica Mars and I'm not like, this does not feel realistic. Like, Southern California, the vibe that you're going for, you're getting a certain like hard-boiled noir vibe and I still feel the realism, even though it is not a very realistic depiction, I think, of Southern California and, a high school student taking on crimes, although later she's obviously older and things like that. But
Yeah.
I still feel very much grounded.
Right.
And that's because of the way it's written. So I'd like to think my readers are grounded in my world. I have seen reviews. I saw one review where somebody's like, it's not realistic that there's a Jewish retired detective in Teaneck. Like, I've never heard of such a thing. That's what the reviewer said. I never heard of a retired Jewish detective in Teaneck.
That's one of the most ignorant comments I've ever heard in my life.
I was like, that's what
you've heard of everything that's ever happened to Teaneck?
It was like, I'm like, first of all, this is not real. Like, it was such a random, I wouldn't have even seen it, but my husband's like, get a load of this review. And I was like, please no. But he read it anyway.
That's funny.
I was like, that's just funny. I was funny, but I was like, that's what you're taking issue with? That? Okay.
I know. I was on Goodreads the other day and there was a 1-star review. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let me see what that's all about. And it was just 1 star, still waiting for my free copy. Like, really? You got to 1-star me because my publisher hasn't yet sent you your free copy for whatever reason. But it's interesting what you're saying about the writing buying you credibility if it's good. And I think that's true. I don't think it's true for the entire book. I think if they're sucked in by the writing, that buys you some leeway with them, but you can't be ridiculous because
aliens are not going to all of a sudden come down and save the day. Like, I mean, I know where to draw the line.
I've never heard of aliens in Teaneck. That's
that would be awesome. You know what? With all the UAPs, which I am fascinated by.
UAPs, tell me, what's that?
United unidentified aerial phenomena, what we call UFOs, we now call UAPs. Got it. But like the government release of documents, the armed forces coming out saying we don't know what this technology is. Like I'm utterly fascinated with it. It's a nice change of pace for me for news. I'm like, oh, read this. Like, this is joyous to me.
Right.
Also,
right.
Really hard to kind of focus on modern global problems when you think something could be out there. Like, to me, that is a deal than anything going on right now.
There's absolutely something out there, by the way. I mean, just statistically, it's so highly improbable that we're alone. I mean, when you think,
I don't think we're alone. It's just whether we can be reached. I think that's the point. Like, because when we start talking about the expansion of the universe and how large the universe could possibly be, and it's infinite and all, like, my brain can't handle it. It can't contain that kind of, like, it doesn't work for me to understand. So that's like a whole nother story. I don't think we're alone, but whether we're like actually not alone, like they're like, what are you doing over there, Earth? Like, I don't know. But I just wanted, that's all I want to listen to and learn about lately, because it's better than anything else that's going on in the world right now.
So book number 3 is due to the publisher May 1st, which you may or may not hit that deadline. And then
I got leeway. I have a little wiggle room.
Okay. That's good. And then after that?
After that, I don't know, because I am only contracted for up to 3 books. So I am working on other things. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, it's really up to the series readers, to support the work. Obviously, we say that all the time. If you want the author to keep writing, you have to read what they're publishing and tell your friends and all that good stuff and leave reviews. But I am working on something else. Well, I'll finish something else, hopefully this summer, and then work on a new project in the fall. We'll see how quickly I can write stuff. It's a historical fiction. That's my next project, which is a love of mine. I love historical fiction. I was a history major, so.
But it's no small task as an author because I know, so like Abbott Keller is a friend of mine, and like I talked to her about her historical fiction, it all has she writes more nonfiction, but in terms of just the amount of research for both to either represent the period or represent the people correctly, is pretty intensive, and that's not to me, research feels like homework, but other people absolutely love it, and that's why they write, so they can research. Where do you fall in there?
I'm a little bit of both. Like
Yeah.
I would say I'm a good moderate when it comes to it. I like doing the research because I stumble upon things. I'm like, that's interesting. And I can't watch TV anymore without going on Wikipedia. Like I can't watch a historical drama without looking up every single historical figure that is mentioned.
Right. You're constantly pausing. With us, we'll like pause, like, I know I've seen that person in something else.
Oh, I do that. Yeah. With actors. I'm like, I remember that guy. But like, I remember watching The Irishman. That was the Scorsese movie that was on Netflix. It was 3 hours long. So we watched it in 2 days. But the gangsters were all from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which is like an hour from me. So of course I Googled, you know, and I'm watching Black Sails on Netflix. So of course I'm like, Anne Bonny, you know, who's a female pirate at the time. And what was pirates like? And then I watched Shogun, which was set in 1600 Japan. So then I was all over.
Best show that's been out this year.
It's phenomenal. I have not
actually
seen
one of my favorite books of all time. I read it back in the 80s, and I had no business reading that book. And I'm like, this is one of the best.
I was a child.
Yeah. I was young, but I remember reading. I was probably in my early 20s, actually late 80s. And I had no money, so I was buying books that were like 1,200 pages, and I was buying them used because I'm like, all right, this is a good deal. And that took me on this whole James Clavell path. But the Shogun miniseries was like, we just watched the last episode last night.
I haven't seen the last one yet.
And we're just like, and you can't even get up and do anything because it's all subtitles. So you're like, you are there, you're in it. But I'm like, oh, this is so well.
I'm a big fan of watching foreign. So my husband does not want to watch foreign stuff because he wants to be on his phone while he hears in the background. I can't watch TV like that. And also subtitles means I can't be on my phone. I got to really pay attention. Otherwise I miss stuff. Right. But it's so good. So good. So if anybody's listening to this and they're like, Shogun, if you have Hulu, you can watch it. You should watch it. It's fantastic.
Right. It's like reading Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. You think like, okay, here's a spy thriller writer who's writing about 15th century cathedral building, and it's 1,000 pages. I don't want to read that. And you start reading like, holy shit, this is amazing. And like, this is no business being good. And you kind of think that about Shogun. You're like, no, it is amazing.
You might like Black Sails. Have you heard of that? Because I started watching. Okay, so Black Sails was a Starz show. There's 4 seasons apparently, and they just put them on Netflix. I went on Reddit and they said the first season is kind of meh, but the second season and third season are amazing. Everybody was like, that's amazing TV, the best TV. So I'm watching it, but it's pirates in 1750 Bahamas. So I'm here for
that. Sounds interesting.
It's very good so far. I mean, I'm liking it. I don't have a high, my expectations or whatever. Scott, I'm waiting for now, but I have high expectations for season 2 since I read that that's what's supposed to be so amazing. But I like historical fiction. I'm also reading right now Kristen Hanna's, and I never read bestseller books because I just never do.
You're reading like, why the fuck was this about bestseller? This is terrible.
I'm reading The Women, which is about female nurses in Vietnam. And I can't
say the name again, the title?
The Women.
The Women, okay.
Female nurses in Vietnam, and I can't put it down. I've taken it to the bus stop. I've taken it with me. Normally I'm on my phone. Now I'm like, nope, I got to read this book. I am staying up late to finish it. I don't typically read bestsellers. I think because I'm a library user and they're always on hold. So I'm like, I'm not going to
wait. Right. The supply and demand prohibits it.
I'm a writer and I'm like, people are like, oh, I'll get your book. I was like, get it from the library. You don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah. Libraries are still buying copies of the book.
And they pay full price for them. This is why I was telling. Requested from the library. They pay full price.
Well, Kim, we're going to wrap up before we do. We're going to do another storytelling, just like we did last time. I don't quite remember how it went last time. Was it a train wreck or did we do okay?
I don't know. You said it was fine, but I felt like I needed editing.
Well, it always needs editing. So this time I've just selected a book. So I'm making things easy because I just read this. I blurbed this. It was a great book, The Mechanics of Memory by Audrey Lee, which is... It's still, it's not out till August. So sneak peek. No, she's got she's a great writer and a lot of pop culture references, especially 80s pop culture references, and I was all over it. I'm like, oh, I know exactly
Love
what.
that stuff.
Nobody knows what that means except for me. She wrote this book for me. So give me a page between 1 and 300.
24.
So I'm
90s
gonna.
pop cultures is where it's at for me.
What's that? 90s? Yeah, it all kind of bleeds together after a while. I'm actually writing a YA 80s thriller right now with a buddy of mine, which I
Oh,
have
that's
no idea
awesome.
I have no idea what's going to happen to it. It's real dark, but it's just so much fun to go back in time.
Does it
Uh,
straddle horror? Because I think YA horror is really having a moment.
yes, I would say it probably straddles horror. I mean, it's not a slasher or anything like that. But it's there are killings.
Yeah,
um,
sounds fun. Teens love that stuff.
all right, so I'm going to quickly look and um, find a sentence that might work for us. All right, I'm going to go with just this very simple sentence and do whatever you want with it. Quinn's boyfriend was a venture capitalist.
Quinn's boyfriend was a venture capitalist. Okay. So I'll go first, I guess.
If you want to, I can go whatever you want to do.
Hmm. Quinn's boyfriend was a venture capitalist. Police suspected he had been pushed out the window of a 34-story building in New York City.
Rutger figured that was a fair assessment. He had known Quinn's boyfriend for a long time. Steve was his name. And Steve was a real dick. And he had perfect teeth. He could understand why somebody might want to push him out the window.
But Steve wasn't the only victim. His office buddy, Mark, had been missing since August. And Mark's wife suspected foul play.
Funny that no one seemed to do much in terms of the investigation until Quinn made a big stink about her dead boyfriend. She's the one that made me come over and investigate the office itself. And for whatever reason, as everyone seemed to shy away as soon as I walked into the lobby, I headed into the kitchen and looked into the office refrigerator.
And inside was a Tupperware with Mark's name on it. And the date was after he'd been reported missing. Well, this didn't make sense. So I noticed a large butt wiggling out of the refrigerator, near the refrigerator. Margie, the secretary, was dumping out dirty containers into the garbage and tisking under her breath. These men are all savages.
I'm sorry to stop you, but you might be interfering with evidence, I told her. She looked at me and then looked back into the sink where she was dumping things out. And that's when we both noticed for the very first time the tip of a small finger
Hopping out of the garbage disposal. But whose hand it belonged to, neither of us would know.
All right, we'll call it there. See, this is us starting with something very basic and going a little bonkers with it, and then be like, all right,
I can't help
what
myself. It's like a compulsion.
what would explain this? Why would there be a tip of a finger in a lunch bag?
I would have no idea. And then later Kim would curse past Kim.
But and don't you do those things though, where you're writing something and like something hits you and you're like, you write it and you're like, this is ridiculous, but it totally excited me to write it. Maybe because of how ridiculous it was. And like, if I can just figure out why this would make sense, I'm going to keep it. And you spend so much time trying to figure out the logic of it. But I think that's the fun part.
I just did that today, to be honest. I'm like, wait, my mind doesn't match up. How do I make it work?
Yeah, you'll figure out a way.
And then I'll let my editor go. I don't understand what's happening here.
You just don't understand me, man.
I wish. Actually, my dream is she'd be like, no, I totally got everything. Everything works perfectly. It all came together perfectly.
I have no comments. We're going to publish it as is.
Yeah. Just work
Well,
on spelling or something. Really?
Kim, good to talk to you again. Good to see your face, and congratulations with your next release, and best of luck getting that third book done. Deadlines are never fun.
I can't wait to be done with it. Ugh. You know how it is. You just want to like turn it in and be like, all right, your problem now.
I hate this now. I don't ever want to see it again. Yeah.
That's how I feel after I have to proofread. I'm like, if I have to read my writing one more time,
totally.
I'm just going to throw away my computer.
That's why I never go back and I've never once read a published book of mine, because I'm like, I've read it so many times before it was published.
Do you find you don't remember it also?
I don't remember anything. People will bring up characters to me that I don't remember whole characters, or I kind of remember them conceptually, but not their name.
Right. And I can't find, I need the last name of a character I introduced in the first book. I have to find it because I need it. It's not important in book 3 and I can't find it. I'm like, did I not? I must have given him a last name.
Right. You just go on to Goodreads and ask your readers to find it for you.
Yeah. But I have to like search it. I got to go through the electronic file and just like search it and be like, where the hell is this?
Good luck. Well, good talking to you, and hope to catch up with you in person soon.
Yeah. Well, if you'll be at BoucherCon, I'll be at BoucherCon.
I'll see you at BoucherCon. I will be there.
Sweet.
All right. Take it easy.
Later.
Bye. So that is it. That is my second conversation with Kim Giarratano. And it was great. It was always nice catching up with her. And I'm looking forward to seeing her in the fall at the BoucherCon conference in Nashville, Tennessee. If you want to find out more about Kim, please go to her website, which is Kimberly Giarratano. Her last name is spelled Giarrataro. And if you want to find out more about me, just go ahead and hop on over to my website, carterwilson.com. And if you want to learn about the writing offerings, the services I'm offering in terms of retreats, one-on-one coaches, and online classes, please go to my new company's website, unboundwriter.com. Thanks very much, as always, everyone, for watching and or listening to this show. Another episode of Making It Up will be out just next week. In the meantime, take care.